Hey guys, Tarek Merface here and welcome to a new video. Big news going on in my life right now, but I will tell you about it in a later video. Today though, I'd like to talk to you about checklists. If you are a general aviation pilot, why don't you go ahead and pull out your Piper or Cessna checklist, whatever it is, single-engine piston aircraft you fly. Go ahead, take that checklist out. It will probably look something like this, or like this. Essentially, it'll be a little booklet with many pages with many items. Now, I'd like to show you the checklist of an Airbus. Now, this is slightly outdated, but it's still very much relevant and pretty much what an Airbus checklist looks like. That's it. That's the entire checklist. Now, why do I want to talk about this? Well, because I'm seeing pilots in general aviation using these big checklists like read and do items. That is to say, instead of performing a flow and then using a checklist to check their items, they're going item by item on their checklist, on their massive checklist for their single engine piston aircraft. These are very simple aircraft to fly in terms of machinery, in terms of the technical side of things. On the pilot side, we need to get the engine running, we need to get the mixture right, and we need to fly the airplane. Now, why is it a problem to use these checklists as read and do items as opposed to checklists? And the answer is, there's actually many answers. The first is, it takes a long time, a lot of time. I have seen students that I've taken from other flight instructors spend 10-15 minutes on the ground going through every single item in the checklist to get an engine started. And they'll take 10 minutes to start an engine. Time is really expensive in aviation. In the UK, a Piper Tomahawk can cost in excess of £200 an hour. So you're paying over £3 a minute. The other problem I have with doing checklists in such a manner, and read and do, is that you lose the ability to fly an airplane. You are relying on the checklist. If I were to take that checklist from a bunch of those students, they would be completely lost as to what to do. Finally, it's a hindrance to situational awareness. I've seen guys in flight take out the checklist and go through it item by item while they're flying. As a result, you're not looking outside, you're not flying the airplane, and you're moving. So by the time you're done with a checklist, you are in a different place than when you started. You will lose that situational awareness. So, how do airline pilots do it? Airline pilots go through a flow. They'll go through multiple flows, where they will do things in a shape, in an arrow form, and then they will do every single item. And then to ensure they've done those items, they will use the checklist. Now, are there times that you should use checklist as read and do? And the answer, of course, is yes, absolutely. One example for the Airbus is the single engine taxi procedure. It's only 4 items, I've got it in my head, but I still use a checklist as a read and do. I know it by memory because I've done it so many times, but I still use a checklist to make sure I do it in order and without missing anything, because in that circumstance, you want to do those items in order. And there are other situations where this would be the case. Some of those might be emergencies, which is why in the Airbus we've got ECAMs. Or, if there is no ECAM, or if you're flying a non-ECAM aircraft, the QRH, which gives you the emergency procedures, right here. Now you might be thinking, Tarek, that's great, but how can I apply that to my real life? Because ultimately, I've got this massive long checklist. And the answer is, the reason you have a massive long checklist is that there's a lot of redundancy. For example, some of the I think it was Pulley, if I'm not mistaken, fantastic checklist. They produce loads of fantastic equipment, but there's a lot of redundancy. They ask you to check the seatbelts about 3 times in the Piper Tomahawk checklist, if I remember correctly, before you're even on the runway. 3 times you're ensuring that the door is closed and that your seatbelt and harness is in place. You only need to do that once. I'm hearing a lot of you screaming, but your own checklist is not certified. And guess what? Neither is the Pulley one. Neither is the one from whatever other company you've bought it from. All these commercial checklists are non-certified. They're based off the AFM, they're based off the POH, but they didn't go to the CAA, they didn't go to the manufacturer and have them approved. The only approved checklist for your aircraft is going to be the POH and AFM. The only circumstance where this is different is for commercial operations, where the checklist you used is in the operational manual part B. And in that case, that would have been certified by the CA and the aircraft manufacturer. But other than that, anything else that is not in the AFM or POH is not certified. So unless you are flying with the POH in the aircraft, opening up the POH to do every single checklist, you're using non-certified checklists. And that's okay. So let me help you create your own checklist. Step 1, take pen and paper and your commercial checklist, or better yet, the POH or AFM. Sit down and go through the checklist, ideally the expanded procedure one, and read what you need to do and when it's indicated why you need to do it. See if there's any redundancy, see if you can cover those items with a flow. Go ahead and write those items down. Step 2, get a picture of the cockpit that you're flying on a big screen, that's fine. And look, circle those items in each checklist. See if there's a flow. For example, I've found out that with Pipers and Cessnas, if I do a clockwise flow around the edges of the dashboard and then spiral inwards, I will very quickly cover all the items I need for most of the checklists. When you can identify a flow, you can see which items you could potentially get rid of. For instance, if the checklist is asking you to check that your seatbelt's tightened and the door is closed 3 times before takeoff, perhaps you could do it just once. I would recommend before takeoff because that's when it will affect you the most. Create that checklist on your computer. And then you can go test it out. Now, I recommend testing it out with your new checklist and the one you've been using so far. Or better yet, you can go ahead and take a flight instructor with you who will be there to make sure you've performed all the safety essential items. And now every time you go flying, you can take note of where the checklist has failed you, where the checklist needs improving, or where the checklist is asking you to do things that you don't really need. Perhaps you can take away items. In the end, you'll come up with something that should look a little bit like this. This is a checklist I produced for the Cessna 172, and as you can see, it's just 2 short slides. Everything else that is essential is covered by flows. For example, one flow, I've got a flow reminder called Bumfitch. I've got a flow reminder called ATPL. Ultimately, you as a pilot need to use checklists. It's a good airmanship quality to use checklists to make sure you've performed all the items. It keeps you from making mistakes because we're humans, we all make mistakes. Also, if you want to become a commercial pilot later on, it's a good habit to get into. However, as a pilot, you also need to be a pilot. You need to be able to fly the aircraft. If there's a cavity, your checklist gets sucked out of the air, or it falls underneath the seat and you can't actually reach it, you need to be able to operate that aircraft safely without the checklist. But that's it for now, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you have anything interesting to add to this conversation, do so in the comments below. Do you use personalized checklists? Do you use these commercial checklists? Or are you one of those people who actually take the POH and open it in flight? I'd be curious to find out. Next video, I'll tell you guys about some big changes going on in my personal life. It has very much to do with aviation, so I'd like to keep you up to date. But for now, that's it. If you liked, subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notification for future uploads. I'm Tarek Merface. I'll see you guys next time, and happy flying.